Chapter 2 Up from the Down Under. That summer, let's see, I'm still living in the basement, my own private down under, in the little room Grim built for me there. Glued up this cheap paneling, right? It sort of buckles away from the concrete cellar walls, a regular ripple effect. But do I complain about the crummy paneling? Or the rug that smells like low tide? I do not, because I like it in the down under. Got the place all to myself, and no fear of Gram sticking her head in the door and saying, "Maxwell, dear, what are you doing?" Not that I ever do much of anything. Grim has it fixed in his head I'm at a dangerous age and they need to keep me under observation, like I might make bombs or start a fire, or whack out the local pets with my trusty slingshot, or whatever, except I never had a slingshot. It was Grim who had one when he was my age. The proof is right there in the family photo album. You can see this blurry little miniature Grim with no front teeth, grinning in the camera, and yanking back his prehistoric slingshot. Good for whacking mastodons, probably. Just proper targets, Grim says, looking up the photo album. End of discussion. Like, oops, better hide the evidence. Don't want to give the dangerous boy any ideas. Not that I have any ideas. My brain is vacant. Okay? I'm just this critter hiding out in the basement, drooling in my comic books or whatever. All right, I never actually drool, but you get the picture. Anyhow, this is the first day of July, already counting down for the 4th, and wondering where can I get an M80, which is supposed to have the explosive power of a quarter stick of dynamite or something, and when it goes off, your heart thuds to a stop for a microsecond. Wham! Which is probably what Grim is afraid of. Eek, eek, Maxwell armed with dynamite. So finally I get bored in the down under, and I'm hanging out in the so-called backyard, your basic chunk of chain link heaven. Grim keeps this crummy little mower in the shed, but what's the point of mowing dirt, right? Okay, I'm out there messing around, and that's when I see the moving van. Not your mainstream nationwide brand name mover either, just some cheapo local outfit. These big bearded dudes in their sweaty undershirts lugging stuff into the duplex, half that's been vacant since last Christmas, when the dope fiend who lived there finally got busted. At first I'm thinking the dope fiend is back. He's out of jail or whatever, and he's moving his stuff back in. Then I see the fair Gwen. Not that I knew her name. That was a little while later. At first she's a glimpse, caught her going between the van and the front door, talking to the Beards. I'm thinking, hey, I know her. And then I'm thinking, no way, butthead, no way you'd know a female that beautiful. But she looks like some kind of movie star, wearing these old jeans and a baggy t-shirt, and her long hair is tied back, and she's probably sweating, but she still looks like a movie star. Like she has this glow, a secret spotlight that follows her around and makes her eyes light up. And I'm thinking, well, this improves the old neighborhood. You're thinking, yeah, right, the goon is barely out of 7th grade. Who does he think he is? All I'm saying, the fair Gwen had star quality, and even a total moron can see it. And the reason she looked familiar is I must have seen her bringing Freak to daycare way back in the dark ages, because the next thing I notice is this crippled up, yellow-haired midget kid strutting around the sidewalk giving orders to the Beards. He's going, "Hey you, doofus. Yeah, you, with the hairy face. Take it easy with that box. That box contains a computer. You know what a computer is." I can't believe it. By the time I'm sneaking along the street to see what's going on, and there's this weird-looking little dude. He's got a normal-sized head, but the rest of him is shorter than a yardstick and kind of twisted in a way that means he can't stand up straight and makes his chest puff out. And he's waving his crutches around and yelling up at the movers. "Hey, Gwen," one of the Beards says, "can't you give this kid a pill or something? He's driving us nuts." So Gwen comes out of the house and pushes the hair out of her big brown eyes, and she goes, "Kevin, go play in the backyard, okay?" "But my computer." "Your computer is fine. Leave the men alone. They'll be done soon, and then we can have lunch." By this time, I'm hunkering along in front of the place, trying to maintain a casual attitude. Except, like I said, my feet are going wild that year and I keep tripping over everything. Cracks in the sidewalk, ants on the sidewalk, shadows, anything. And then the strange little dude jerks himself around and he catches sight of me. And he lifts a crutch and points it up at my heart and he goes, "Identify yourself, Earthling." I'm busy keeping my feet from tripping and don't get it that he means me. I said, "Identify yourself, Earthling, or suffer the consequences." I'm like, what? And before I can decide whether or not to tell him my name or which name, because by now I recognize him as the weird little robot kid from daycare and maybe he remembers me as Kicker. Anyhow, before I can say a word, he pulls the trigger on that crutch and makes a weapon noise and goes, "Then die, Earthling, die." I motor out of there without saying a word because I'm pretty sure he really means it. The way he points that crutch is only part of it. You have to see the look in his eye. Man, that little dude really hates me. He wants me to die. Okay, I want you to take a few stickies here. On page 7, I want you to title a sticky, Fair Gwen, Freak's Mom. I want you to give a physical description for her. Max describes her as he sees her pull up to move into the duplex next door or down the street. And then on a separate sticky, I want you to, right at the top, Freak. And then I want you to give a physical description of how Max sees him. And I think you can also, I want you to also include a personality description. How do you get a sense of his personality? What kind of things is he doing and saying to the movers? You may need to go back and look and write a couple of things down. On a third sticky on page 9, I want you to write down what Freak does to Max that is intimidating or scares him a little bit. Chapter 3, American Flyer, page 10. Okay, back to the down under, right? My room in the basement. Scuttle into your dim hole in the ground, Maxwell dear. Big goon like you, growing up an inch a day, and this midget kid, this crippled little humanoid, he actually scared you. Not the kind of scare that makes your knee bones feel like water. More like the kind of scare where you go, whoa, I don't understand this. I don't get it. What's going on? Like calling me Earthling, which by itself is pretty weird, right? I already mentioned a few of the names I've been called, but until the robot boy showed up, nobody had ever called me Earthling. And so I'm lying on my mattress there in the great down under, and it comes to me that he's right. I am an Earthling. We're all of us Earthlings, but we don't call each other Earthling. Okay, at this point I want you to stop and look up what Earthling means. You can use the computer and write that down on a sticky. Bottom of page 10. No need, because it's the same thing as in this country. We're all Americans, but we don't go around to people saying, "Excuse me, American, can you tell me how to get to the nearest 7-Eleven?" So I'm thinking about that for a while, lying there in the cellar dark, and pretty soon the down under starts to get small, like the walls are shrinking. And I go up the bulkhead stairs into the backyard and find a place where I can check it out. There's this one scraggly tree behind the little freak's house, right? Like a stick in the ground with a few wimped out branches. And there he is, hardly any bigger now than he was in daycare, and he's standing there waving his crutch up at the tree. I kind of slide over to the chain link fence and get a better angle on the scene. What's he doing, whacking at that crummy tree? Trying to jump up and hit this branch with this little crutch, and he's mad, hopping mad. Only he can't really jump. He just makes this thumping, jumping kind of motion. His feet never leave the ground. Then what he does, he throws down the crutch and he gets down on his hands and knees and crawls back to the house. If you didn't know, you would think he was like a kindergarten creeper who forgot how to walk. He's that small. And he crawls real good, better than he can walk. Before you know it, he's dragging this wagon out from under the steps. rusty red thing, one of those old American Flyer models. Anyhow, the little freak is tugging it backwards a few inches at a time, chugging along until he gets this little wagon under the tree. Next thing, he picks up his crutch and he climbs in the wagon and he stands up and he's whacking at the tree again. By now, I figured out that there's something stuck up in the branches and he wants to get it down. This small, bright-colored thing looks like a piece of folded paper. Whatever it is, that paper thing, he wants it real bad, but even with the wagon, there's no way he can reach it. No way. Okay, now I want you to stop and take a sticky. The author shows you a character trait in Freak. So we see that he has a physical disability. How does he problem solve what he cannot reach in the tree? And how does that make him a strong person? Middle of page 12. So I go over to his backyard trying to be really quiet, but I'm no good at sneaking up. Not with these humongous feet, and he turns and faces me with that crutch raised up like he's ready to hit a grand slam on my head. He wants to say something. You can tell that much, but he's so mad. He's all huffed up, and the noise he makes, it could come from a dog or something, and he sounds like he can hardly breathe. What I do, I keep out of range of that crutch, and just reach up and pick the paper thing right out of the tree. Except it's not a paper thing, it's a plastic bird, light as a feather. I have to hold it real careful or it might break. That's how flimsy it is. I go, "You want this back or what?" The little freak is staring at me bug-eyed, and he goes, "Oh, it talks." I give him the bird thing. What is it, like a model airplane or something? You can tell he's real happy to have the bird thing back, and his face isn't quite so fierce. He sits down in the wagon and he goes, "This is an ornithopter." An ornithopter is defined as an experimental device prepared by flapping wings, or you could say that an ornithopter is just a big word for mechanical bird. That's how he talked, like right out of a dictionary. So smart you can hardly believe it. While he's talking, he's winding up the bird thing. There's this elastic band inside, and he goes, "Observe and be amazed, Earthling." And then he lets it go. And you know what? I am amazed. Because it does fly just like a little bird, flitting up and down and around higher than I can reach. I chase after the thing until it boinks against the scrawny tree trunk, and I bring it back to him, and he winds it up again and makes it fly. We keep doing that. It must be for almost an hour until finally the elastic breaks. I figure that's it, end of ornithopter, but he says something like, "All mechanical objects require periodic maintenance. We'll schedule installation of a new propulsion unit as soon as the Fair Guinevere gets a replacement." Even though I'm not sure what he means, I go, "That's cool. You live around here, Earthling?" Okay, so on a sticky, Max notes that Freak is quite smart, very intelligent. I want you to give a couple examples that the author describes to you to show you how smart Freak is. What is his toy device? And what does it do? How does he talk? What are some things that you can write down that prove that Freak is very smart? Top of page 14. "Over there," I point out the house in the down under. He goes, "What?" And I figure it's easier to show him than explain all about Graham and Grim and the room in the cellar. So I pick up the handle on the American Flyer wagon and I tow him over. It's real easy. He doesn't weigh much, and I'm pretty sure I remember looking back and seeing him sitting up in the wagon happy as can be, like he's really enjoying the ride and not embarrassed to have me pulling him around. But like Freak says later in this book, you can remember anything, whether it happened or not. All I'm sure of is he never hit me with that crutch. Okay, so on a sticky, I want you to think about, these are two unlikely friends. Freak is a small boy with a physical disability, and Max is a large boy, a large, hulking, almost man-sized kid. Freak is extremely intelligent, and Max describes himself as having no brain. So we see the differences there. I want you to write those differences down. And now I want you to think about, how are they maybe good for each other? What might make them be good friends? So on one sticky, I want you to write down how they're different, and I told you. On a second sticky, I want you to write down, how do you think they might make good friends? We're at the top of page 15. What frightened the fair Gwen? Freak's not in my room for 10 minutes before he sets me straight on the fair Gwen. He's able to hump down the steps by himself, except it makes him sort of out of breath. You can hear him wheezing, or I guess you'd call it panting, like a dog does on a hot day. He gets into my room and I close the bulkhead door and he goes, "Cool. You get to live down here all by yourself?" I eat upstairs with Grim and Graham. Freak works himself up onto the foot of my bed and uses a pillow to make himself comfortable. It's pretty dim down here, only the daylight from one basement window, but it catches him just right. It makes his eyes shine. "Gram must be your grandmother," he says. "Grim would be, I suppose, a sobriquet for your grandfather based on his demeanor." I go, "Huh?" Freak grins and pushes back his yellow hair and he goes, "Pardon my vocabulary. Sobriquet means nickname and demeanor means expression. I merely postulated that you call your grandfather Grim because he's grim. Postulate means..." "I know," I say, which is a lie, except I can guess what he means and figure it out that way. "So how come you call your mom Fair Guinevere? Is that the nickname?" Okay, so at this point I want you to write down a sticky because we kind of confused it. Grim is actually Max's grandfather. And so Freak was, I want you to also write down that sticky. Freak was saying, well, I guess that he was your grandfather because of his age and the fact that you called him Grim, like a personality trait, like he was grim in nature. But Grim isn't his real name. Top of page 16. I know, I say, which is a lie, except I guess what he means. Figure it out that way. So how come you call your mom Fair Guinevere? Is that a nickname? Freak is shaking his head. I can see he's trying not to let on that he's laughing inside. "Guinevere," he finally says, catching his breath. "The Fair Guinevere, from the legend of King Arthur. You know about King Arthur, right?" I shrug. "The only King Arthur I know is the brand of flour Graham uses, and if I say that, I'll really sound like a butthead." He goes, "My mom's name is Gwen, so sometimes I call her the Fair Guinevere or the Fair Gwen. King Arthur was the first king of England way back when there were still dragons and monsters in the world. Arthur was this wimpy little kid, an orphan, and there was this magic sword stuck in a big stone, okay? The old king had died, and whoever could pull the sword from the stone proved he was the next king. All these big tough dudes came from all over to yank at the sword, and they couldn't budge it. One day this wimpy little kid tried it when nobody was looking, and the sword slipped right out, like it was stuck in butter. So he was the king, this little kid." Freak nods. "He's really into this story, and he makes shapes in the air with his hands. This is the first time for me hearing Freak really talk, and right away I know one thing. When he's talking, you can't take your eyes off him. His hands are moving, and it's like he's really seeing it, this story about the old king. Arthur's magical sword is called Excalibur, and the Fair Guinevere is this pretty girl who becomes his queen. Fair in those days meant the same as beautiful does now. Anyhow, Arthur got bored just sitting around, so he invited all the knights of England to come live in the castle. They all ate supper at his round table, which is why they were called the Knights of the Round Table. Every now and then King Arthur would send them off on a special secret mission, which in the old days they called a quest. They had to slay dragons and monsters and evil knights. I assume you know what a knight wears into battle." I think so, but I like hearing Freak talk, so I go, better tell me. And that's when I find out why he's so interested in some clanky old knights. Because Freak really lights up and he goes, the knights were like the first human version of robots. They were this metal armor to protect them and make them invincible. When I get my stuff unpacked, I'll show you the pictures. It's pretty amazing, really, that hundreds of years before they had computers, they were already attempting to exceed the design limitations of the human body. I go, huh? And Freak sort of chuckles to himself like he expected me to go, huh? And he says, the design limitations of the human body. You know, like we're not bulletproof, and we can't crash rocks with our bare hands. And if we touch a hot stove, we get burned. King Arthur wanted to improve his men, so he made them armor-plated. Then he programmed them to go out and do these quests, slay the dragons and so on, which is sort of how they program robots right now. I go, I thought there weren't any real robots, just in movies. Boy, does that make his eyes blaze, like, whoa, talk about laser beams. He's like fuming, so upset he can hardly talk. Finally, he gets control of himself and he goes, I suppose I must make allowances for your ignorance. On the subject of robots, you are clearly misinformed. Robots are not just in the movies. Robotics, the science of designing and building functional robots, is a huge industry. There are thousands of robot units presently in use, millions of them. They don't look like the robots you see in movies, of course, because they're designed according to function. Many robotic devices are in fact sophisticated assembly units, machines that put together cars and trucks and computers. For instance, the space shuttle has a robot arm. Right, I say, I saw that on TV. Okay, right now I want you to stop and take a sticky. Why do you think Freak is so fascinated with the Knights of the Round Table? What about them might he have something in common with? What might he have in common with King Arthur in this legend that he's telling Max about? So on a sticky, go ahead and make those comments. You're basically stating Freak is like a robot, or he looks up to robotics because Freak looks up to King Arthur, because Freak is fascinated or in awe of the Knights of the Round Table because. So make a few statements there and draw some comparisons. On page 19 at the top, he's talking about robotics. Freak sighs and rolls his eyes. Ah, yes, he says. Television, the opiate of the masses. For about the 11th time, I go, huh? Opiate, a drug, he says. Massive, that means large and heavy. Thus, television is the drug of fatheads, opiate of the masses. You don't have a TV? Of course I have a television, he says. How else could I watch Star Trek? Matter of fact, I watch tons of tube. But I also read tons of books so I can figure out what's true and what's fake, which isn't always easy. Books are like truth serum. If you don't read, you can't figure out what's real. This time I don't say huh, because then I might have to explain how I'm an LD, and reading books is the last thing I want to do. Right after trimming my toenails with a lawnmower, gargling nails, and eating worms for breakfast. Of course, Freak has probably already guessed I'm a learning disabled because he's had a look around my room and it isn't exactly the public library. I'll lend you some of my books, he says. Cool, I say, like it's just what I've been waiting for, another chance to prove I'm a butthead. Then we both hear it at the same time, this voice calling his name and sounding real worried. The fair Gwen, he says, I gotta beam out of here. I go up and open the bulkhead door, and his mother is in the backyard, and she's looking at the little red wagon. She catches sight of me coming out of the down under, and it's like somebody shot her, like she's scared out of her mind. Kevin, she says, I'm looking for a little boy. Freak is huffing and puffing as he humps himself up the steps, and the fair Gwen grabs Freak and puts him in the wagon, and I swear she almost runs home. Like if she doesn't get away quick, something really bad is going to happen. Freak is in the wagon, and he's trying to look back at me, trying to shrug his shoulders, and let me know he doesn't understand what I got into the fair Gwen, but I know. It's pretty simple, really. She's scared of me. Okay, so on a sticky, I want you to write down a few ways that Max and Freak made connections or grew a friendship while they were talking. What did they share? Then on another sticky, we see that Freak's mom, Gwen, is looking for her son, and she doesn't know where he is, and finds him. And she's really scared. And Max interprets that as she's really scared of him. How would you think that makes Max feel? And also, why might that be really hard? Think back to how does his family look at him? How does his grandfather Grimm look at him? So make a couple of stickies. One, how did these two young men connect? And on a second sticky, explain how you think Max would feel in this moment where Gwen is scared. Spitting image, page 21. There's a place I go inside my head sometimes. It's cool and dim in there, and you float like a cloud. No, you are a cloud. The kind you see in the sky on a windy day. The way they keep changing shape, except you can't really see it changing. It just sort of happens. And suddenly you realize the cloud that looks like a big hand with fat fingers now looks like a catcher's mitt or a big soft TV set. Like that. Anyhow, I went there right after the fair Gwen ran off with that look on her face like, what was he doing with my poor little boy, stealing him away in the wagon? What I do is lie on the floor under my bed where you can just barely see the bed springs and stuff because it's so dark. And before long, I'm somewhere else, sort of floating, and it's so cool and empty in there. You don't have to think about anything. You're nothing. You're nobody. Nothing matters. You're not even there. Time out. Except this time, I can't stay as long as I'd like because Graham is knocking on the door going, Maxwell! Max, are you in there? Please answer me, dear. It's important. Yeah, right, but I wedge out from under the bed. There's getting to be less and less room under there, and I dust myself off and open the door. There's no lock, but Graham has this thing about waiting until I say come in. She makes a big deal about not intruding. Maxwell, she says, and she takes a little step inside the room, and you can tell she'd rather not be here. She makes this face because the place is dark and messy, and probably it smells like my socks or whatever. Max, dear, I'm sorry to bother you. You know I never come into the basement, but I just got a call from Gwen Avery, and I think it's important. Uh-oh, I'm thinking. Now the fair Gwen is calling up my Graham, probably to report a great hulking beast that lives in the cellar and close up inside, waiting for the worst. She called to say how sorry she was, Graham is saying. Huh? I guess she came to pick up her little boy, is that right? You and Kevin were making friends? Making friends? What idea that is, but Graham gets her feelings hurt pretty easy, so I don't actually say that. What I say is, yeah, I guess so. Graham is uneasy. I can see her eyes flitting nervously around the room, like she's crossing the border into a really foreign country. This is as good a place as any to mention that even though Graham is my grandmother, she doesn't look like a granny. She looks more like a mother because she was, as she always says, a mere child myself when my real mother was born. Well, I get the impression poor Gwen wasn't expecting to see you looking so big, and now she thinks she's offended you. Does that make any sense? I guess so. You know her, huh? Oh, my eyes, says Graham. Gwen was a good friend of your mother's. They were both pregnant at the same time. Then later on, you and little Kevin went to the same daycare. Did you know that? I give a shrug because I don't really like Graham to know much. I remember about way back then. Graham is saying, she said she especially wanted me to tell you this, Max. She said she's delighted that you and Kevin are going to be friends. That's the word she used, delighted, and she's inviting you to supper. Okay, now I want you to pause and take a sticky. How does that change your opinion of Gwen? What does that tell you about her as a person, that she's willing to make a phone call and apologize for how she came across? Also, what is Gwen happy about on this sticky? Near the bottom of page 23, first thing, without thinking, I say, do I have to? Graham reaches out and she puts her hand on my shoulder, real light and feathery. You can feel how nervous she is just to touch me, and how it makes her uncomfortable to have to look up at me, because, did I mention, I'm a lot bigger than Graham, bigger than Grim, too, bigger than most people? It's true. Graham says, she feels bad about how she treated you, Maxwell, dear, and she wants to make it up to you. You don't have to go, but it would be the right thing to do. It was no big deal, I say. She just ran away is all. I guess I scared her. It wasn't you, Graham says. No? Then who was it scared her? Now she's got her tongue stuck, and you can see her swallowing in her throat like her mouth is dry. I'll just leave that to Gwen, she says. She's quite a remarkable young woman, you know, raising that poor boy all on her own. He's not a poor boy, I say. You should hear him talk. I think the rest of him is so small because his brain is so big. Yes, says Graham. Well, well. Graham is always saying that, well, well, like it means something, which I guess it does to her. Anyhow, I agree to have supper with Freak and his mom, even though the idea of it makes me feel tensed up, like there is a hand inside my stomach and the hand is, you know, making a fist. Okay, so at this point I want you to stop and take a sticky. When he uses a metaphor, he says, the idea of going over for dinner makes him feel tensed up, like there is a hand inside my stomach and the hand is, you know, making a fist. That's actually a simile because he uses the word like. His stomach feels like there is a hand inside making a fist. So, what do you think that means? How do you think Max feels about going next door?